All righty. Good morning, everybody. Welcome once again to those who have not joined us before. This is an opportunity where we get to hear from a speaker who is able to present some information to us that may help us kind of sort of make some good choices or choices that are right for ourselves. So today we have Tanya Velez. Tanya is a board certified allopathic family medicine physician. Say that all at one time, right? She operates Velez Family Health, and that is in the Metro West portion of Orlando. And she takes a holistic approach to healthcare so that she can combine her knowledge of the conventional with evidence-based alternative therapies. And she has had a lifetime of learning and special skills in the medical field and outside of medicine as well. And she even started her first job in something as simplistic as medical records. So at least she was starting out trying to find out what was going on, medical billing, all of those types of things, and working in a cardiologist's office after high school. And she has training as an EMT, that's your emergency medical technician, and worked as EMT in Miami. And then she attended Valencia College, the University of Central Florida in Orlando, as well, where she graduated with her Bachelor of Science in molecular cell biology and microbiology. So if that's not getting down into the nitty gritty, I don't know what is. So then she received a minor in business from UCF as well. And she then went on to attend the University of South Florida's College of Medicine for her medical degree. And she saw fit to come on back over to Central Florida, where she did her residency at Florida Hospital Family Medicine, and that was in Orlando. And lastly, she wanted to fulfill her dream of providing, a more well-rounded and natural approach to her practice. So then she did a 2-year fellowship in integrative medicine through the University of Arizona in Tucson. So that in and of itself would have been enough for a lot of people because that's a mouthful. But in addition, she did a diploma in international medicine and public health through the Institute for International Medicine. So if I haven't given you enough to let you know that this is a highly credentialed individual, I don't know what else to say. She has definitely traveled around the world, Dominican Republic, Honduras, Panama, Thailand, Ecuador, wherever it is. She's always committed to making sure that everyone gets the appropriate medical assistance that they need, whether she's here in the States or abroad. So she is an individual that I have known for almost a decade. I can tell you that her energy and her passion for the community is incredible. So I hope that you will join me in welcoming this wonderful young lady who is taking her time away from patients, thank you in advance, to go ahead and share with us some information about where we stand today in this COVID this COVID society that we're in. So everybody welcome Dr. Tanya Velez. And Tanya, if I'm not mistaken, Katria has given you the ability to share your screen. Let us know
Yes.
if you have that ability. And if so, you can go ahead and share your screen. Perfect.
Got it. Can you guys see my screen?
We certainly can.
Awesome.
And
Okay.
we just need you to maximize it a little bit.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, thank you, Danita, for that awesome introduction. I'm humbled by everything you just said. But thank you for having me. Like she said, I met Danita at I think it was a Chamber of Commerce meeting many years ago, and we've become friends since then. So thank you so much for having me. Today I wanted to come in and talk about this crazy COVID world that we're living in, and unfortunately we're in a surge right now. So just wanted to talk a little bit about how to protect yourselves, how to protect your loved ones, And also what I realize is that there's a lot of misinformation out there. And we've kind of heard information here and there, bits and pieces. And so today I wanted to kind of put it all together, and I have a lot of information to cover. So I'm going to talk really fast. But if you guys have any questions or anything, I want to make sure that we have time for questions at the end. But Danita is going to be cracking the whip on me as far as time. So I'm going to kind of speed through things. But please feel free to ask me questions afterwards, and I'll hang out for a few minutes after that if you want to private message me as well. So we were on a break. So come around May, June of this year, things were going pretty good. Vaccinations had kicked in back in January, and caseloads had gone really down. Unfortunately, come July, the situation kind of changed. And after the 4th of July weekend, cases really started to spike. And as you all know, on July 27th, the CDC recommended to start wearing masks again indoors, whether you're vaccinated or not. And the reason for that was there was an outbreak up in Provincetown where the majority of people were actually vaccinated. And that's how they kind of found out that with this Delta variant, it could be transmitted even in vaccinated people. The good thing about that outbreak is that it also showed that the vaccines were effective, and there was no hospitalizations from people that were vaccinated over, I think they say like 500 cases or something like that. Unfortunately, right now, Florida leads the nation in kids being hospitalized for COVID, which I thought was very important to emphasize, especially this being the Children's Cabinet. Pediatric hospitalizations are way up. As you can see on that graph on the left side, this is actually the biggest wave for anybody being hospitalized, but especially for children of the entire pandemic. And as you can see on the graph on the right side, back in January where we had the big surge, it was mostly over 70-year-olds that had that kind of really big spike, and then everybody else was on the bottom of that graph. If you look all the way to the right, all of those lines are a lot more bunched together now, which means that the trajectory is kind of the same for younger people as it had been for the older people before. Unfortunately, like I mentioned, the predominant strain right now is the Delta variant, with over 83% of the cases. And that's really important to note because of how transmissible this variant is. So there's a number called the R naught. And what that means is it kind of tells you how many people one infected person would potentially infect. So on the top left there, it shows that the original strain, one infected person would potentially infect about 2 people. And as it's mutated and changed, we've had multiple waves. The Delta strain is anywhere between 5 to 8 people. So that is much more transmissible than before. And the viral load or how much the virus replicates in the body is a lot higher with the Delta variant. And they estimate it to be about 1,000 times higher, the viral load with this. So we live in a modern society where we have information at our fingertips. Unfortunately, that also leads to a lot of misinformation. So again, I wanted to just kind of put things together for you guys today and hopefully answer a lot of questions and concerns that you've had of this conflicting information that you may have heard. So let's break it down to some basics. So what is COVID-19? So COVID-19 is a virus and is part of the coronavirus family. It's called the coronavirus, standing for corona, which means crown in Latin. And in the electron microscope, it looks like it's wearing a crown, which is that top picture there. So it's got the red halo around it. There's a lot of viruses in this family. The common cold is in this family. But also SARS, which was caused an endemic back in 2003. So an endemic being a localized outbreak compared to pandemic, which is around the world. as well as MERS, or the Middle Eastern variant that happened a few years after that. So the interesting thing is that SARS-1 and SARS-2, so SARS stands for Severe Acute Respiratory Syndrome. COVID-19 is named as SARS-2. So SARS-1 that caused that outbreak back in 2003, and this one now, COVID-19, are about 80% similar. And that's really important because when we talk about vaccines, then we kind of realize how long this virus has actually been studied for. It's called COVID-19 because of coronavirus disease. So they just took the letters from there, and it was discovered or first diagnosed in 2019. So that's where the 19 comes from. There isn't 19 versions of this virus. It was discovered in 2019. And this is a zoonotic disease, so meaning it originated in an animal. Most likely it originated in a bat. We're not sure if it skipped other species and then came to humans, but most likely it came from a bat. And about 60% of our infectious diseases that affect humans do originate in animals, including things like Ebola, HIV, the swine flu, the bird flu. So what's the difference between a virus and a bacteria? So surprisingly, viruses are not living organisms. They are super small, so they're submicroscopic, and they could only grow and reproduce inside of a host. It cannot live for long outside of a host. And viral infections tend to be systemic, so meaning it affects multiple organs of the body. And as opposed to bacteria. So bacteria are living organisms. They can live on their own. They could reproduce. They could live in the soil, in the water, in different places. And when they cause infection, most of the time, it's more of a localized infection in the body. And we could treat that with antibiotics, which we cannot treat viruses with antibiotics. So how does COVID-19 replicate? So I like to call it the pirate virus. So think of our famous pirate Jack Sparrow in a dinghy. It doesn't really have a whole lot, but he could hijack a big ship and take over the crew and take over the machinery, and with that make copies of himself. So the virus just replicates, makes copies of itself inside of the cell using all of the cell machinery. And once the cell is full, then the cell basically bursts and releases all these viral particles. And this is what's known as the incubation period. So you've probably heard, you have to isolate for 14 days, et cetera, et cetera. And that's because this incubation period where the virus is actually replicating inside of the cells before you get any symptoms. So we've definitely heard a lot about variants and mutations and Delta and Alpha and all these things. So what they're referring to with this is every time that the virus replicates or makes copies of itself, it can make some mistakes. And every time it makes a mistake, that is what's called a mutation. These mutations could potentially hinder the virus or potentially make it better. And it could change the behavior of the virus. So it could make it more transmissible, replicate faster, or it could potentially evade antibodies and the immune system. Some of the mutations can change what's called the spike protein. So the little spikes that are sitting on top of the virus, and that's where antibodies bind. So that's how it could evade potentially the immune system. So the reason why this is so important is, again, we have to use multiple layers of protection, such as masking, vaccination, social distance, all of these things to try to minimize the replication of this virus. So remember, it needs a host to survive. It needs a host to replicate. If it's not replicating, it's not causing mutations. So I'll address a few myths that we've all heard. So one of the myths is COVID is just like another flu. COVID is just like H1N1. We didn't lock down for that. Why are we taking all these measures for this? Well, the reason is that it's nothing like H1N1. And if you look on the CDC's website, they have some estimates of caseloads and whatnot of H1N1. So they have summarized the numbers between 2009 and 2018. So that's a whole 9-year span. And what they found was here in the US only, this is just the US, that there was 100.5 million cases in the US, 936,000 hospitalizations, and about 75,000 deaths due to H1N1. And now compare that to COVID-19 that's been around like a year and a half-ish. Here in the US only, there's been about 36 million cases and about over 619,000 deaths. So that is 8 times the deaths of H1N1. And H1N1, remember, that was a 9-year span. So this is in a year and a half, we've had 8 times the deaths from COVID-19. So we're definitely dealing with a completely different beast. And this is much more transmissible than H1N1 ever was. And H1N1 is still around. We just vaccinate for it. And it's been moderately controlled. So what can we do? So prevention is, or true prevention is not waiting for bad things to happen, is preventing things from happening in the first place. And this is really where we need to focus our efforts here. So we have multiple layers of protection. So we live in Florida. We all know what the sun can do to us. So when we spend time out in the sun, we wear sunscreen, we put on clothes, we wear a hat, we put on our shades to try to protect ourselves from the sun. So these are all the different layers of protection. So with this virus, we have physical distance, masking, hand washing, and vaccination. So none of these things are 100%, but when put together, they're very, very, very effective in preventing transmission of COVID-19. And with any virus, there's something called a minimum infectious dose, which means how much of the virus do you need to be exposed to to actually develop an infection and develop disease. So if we decrease the amount of virus exposure you have, then you decrease that risk of being infected. So physical distance, I know this is a new word that we learned during this pandemic, that was social distancing. And the reason for that is that a lot of different viruses and bacteria are transmitted or carried in what we call respiratory droplets, which is basically water molecules that are expelled in your breath when you're talking, breathing, coughing, all of those things. So that's why when you're wearing a mask, sometimes you might feel like it's kind of damp in the inside. And that's just those water molecules coming out in your breath. So you have large molecules and smaller molecules. The large ones tend to be real heavy and tend to kind of fall to the ground. So that 6-foot distance that we keep hearing about is kind of the average of where most large molecules will fall. It could go further, it could go, closer, but that's kind of the average. The smaller particles are a little more buoyant. They can hang out in the air a little longer, so they could reach further distances. But the further away you are from a potentially infected person, the less amount of virus that you are exposed to, and therefore less risk of transmission to you. Again, going back to that minimum infectious dose that you need. So masks have been an incredibly debated topic recently, but there's a long history for the use of masks. Way back in 1867, Louis Pasteur discovered that there was that germs were causing wound disease in surgical patients. And in 1897, there was some Russian scientists and surgeons that were doing some studies, and they found that respiratory droplets carried bacteria. So back then, they started to wear masks in the OR for surgeries to try to prevent germs from going into the wounds. And they were wearing actually cotton masks. It wasn't until about the 1960s that disposable masks became available, and that was just more so for convenience more than anything. Then a couple plagues hit, so the Manchurian plague and then the flu pandemic of 1918. During that time is the first time where doctors started to wear masks outside of the OR, and then recommended it for others because they realized that it also protects the wearer against diseases. And that's when local mandates started happening for masks during those pandemics. So how do masks work? Well, again, nothing is 100%, but Each step helps to decrease your exposure. So it will block those respiratory droplets. And instead of expelling a whole bunch of those droplets out into the air, is going to decrease the amount that you expel. And if the other person that's being exposed also wears a mask, then that it decreases it even more. So the persons without masks there are the ones with the maximum exposure. And the American Academy of Pediatrics and the CDC have released a statement stating that all staff at schools and all students should be wearing a mask, regardless of vaccination status. And this is in order to be able to keep in-school learning, which is very important. But they also recommended other measures such as working on the ventilation, quarantining, testing, cleaning, disinfecting, all these different steps, all these layers of protection in order to keep schools safe. And by doing so, we could decrease the amount of quarantines that we have. We could decrease the amount of absences due to sickness and keep kids in school. So I always get asked, what kind of mask is the best mask? And my answer is any mask is gonna be better than no mask. You probably wanna look for masks that are 2 to 3 layers, and there's some that you could put filters into. Cotton masks are great, as well as knitted masks. The only ones that I don't recommend, and it's because it's not a mask, are the gaiters. And if you see there on the bottom right, the fleece gaiters are actually dangerous. And the reason being is that it breaks down those big, large particles into small ones. So then those are dispersed out more. So you're actually dispersing potentially more virus by wearing a fleece. And masks, one of the myths I've heard is masks decrease your oxygen levels. This is absolutely not true. This would mean that doctors and nurses and everybody that works in the medical field will be passing out constantly because we wear a mask all the time. I have asthma, I wear a mask. Definitely some masks are a little bit harder to breathe in than others. I'm not gonna lie about that. So I just recommend that you try several different masks until you find one that's comfortable for you. And the ones that kind of pop out from the nose and mouth are gonna be much better than the ones that kind of smush them in. And hand washing, I'll be brief about this one. We all know we need to wash our hands. I think at this point, we just need to do it more often and just making sure, you know, if you touch a gas pump, a doorknob, all these kind of public places that you're cleaning your hands, either washing your hands for at least 20 seconds or using a hand sanitizer that's at least 60% alcohol and rubbing vigorously. Uh-oh. Not changing. There it goes. Okay. All right. So vaccines. So this is the big topic that I wanted to hit up. So we have 3 different vaccines: Pfizer and Moderna, and then Johnson and Johnson. So Pfizer and Moderna are what we call mRNA vaccines. These are messenger RNA. So basically, think of it kind of like a Mission Impossible message, a message that's sent to the cell that's then later destroyed. And it's kind of like a message in a bottle. So the mRNA is wrapped in a little fatty bubble to help it survive until it gets to the cell. So then the cell gets this message, it reads the code and uses this machinery, kind of like a 3D printer, to create what's called the spike protein from the virus. And then it puts the little spike protein on the outside of the cell, kind of waves it like a flag to tell the immune system to come over. So all your little soldiers in the immune system come over and create weapons against these spike proteins. So those weapons are called antibodies. The Johnson & Johnson vaccine is very similar, except for it uses DNA instead of messenger RNA. And instead of being in a fatty bubble, they use what's called an adenovirus vector. So it's basically a virus that's inactivated and completely harmless, and they just inject the DNA into it. And that's how the message then reaches the cell, but the rest is exactly the same. So the myth is that this technology is new, and it's actually not that new. So remember, back in 2003, we had the SARS come out, and it's been researched since then. And as you recall, 80% or SARS-1 and SARS-2 are 80% similar. So they started vaccine research way back in 2003. So it's been definitely a long time. Now, the mRNA technology and this adenovirus technology has been studied since around the 1990s with a lot of advancements in the early 2000s. And there's even a Ebola vaccine that's approved in Europe. That's the adenovirus model. And so these type of vaccines are a lot easier to use, a lot quicker to be done. With the traditional vaccines, you had to purify a certain part of the virus, a certain protein, or just inactivate the virus and actually inject people with the virus itself. And as you can imagine, that takes a whole lot of time. Whereas with these, because there's no actual virus particles in it, it's just the code. It's kind of like a plug and play. You could use this technology for a lot of different viruses and things like that. Also, there was a lot of partnerships between the private sector and the public sector to get these vaccines out and be able to be mass distributed in a much faster amount of time. So one of the myths is we don't know the long-term side effects of the vaccine. So you may have heard some of the side effects of the vaccine, which is the same for any vaccine, is that immune response. As far as long-term side effects, historically, there has not been any vaccine that has shown any long-term side effects that were not shown by 6 weeks. So meaning that by 6 weeks, we would have known if there was going to be any long-term side effects. And these vaccines have been in phase 1 testing that started way back in the summer of 2020. There's been about 351 million doses given as of August 9th. And it was passed through the FDA and had to pass their rigorous standards to receive that emergency use authorization. There were a few very rare serious side effects, especially with Johnson & Johnson, where they found this blood clotting potential rare side effect. And there was 39 cases out of 13 million doses of Johnson & Johnson given. So it is extremely rare. The other two things that you may have heard on the news as far as myocarditis or pericarditis or inflammation of the heart, or something we call, I'll call it GPS for short. Those things are still being investigated, and again, still very rare. We just don't know if those particular cases were actually caused by the vaccine or not. Those particular conditions are actually caused by, could be caused by a slew of things, including viral infections, including COVID-19. So it's very hard to really see if it was truly caused by that. Some of the other myths: vaccines don't work or they make you sick. Vaccines are highly effective. Originally, it was much more effective against the original strains of COVID-19, but even with the Delta variant, 2 doses of Moderna or Pfizer are at least 88% effective, and Johnson & Johnson at least 85% effective against severe disease. So that's what the vaccine was originally intended to do, is keep people out of the hospitals and decrease the amount of complications. So vaccinated people are 3 times less likely to get infected, 8 times less likely to get symptoms, and 25 times less likely to be hospitalized. And that holds true even with the Delta strain. A lot of my patients ask me as far as infertility. Vaccines, the COVID vaccine does not cause infertility. This was a rumor that got started on social media and then just took off. And that rumor was saying that supposedly the mRNA targets a protein called, which I can't pronounce, but syncytin-1, which is used in placental development. If you recall basic science, proteins are made up of amino acids. There's 20 standard amino acids, and there's a sequence of amino acids that build up a protein. So basically, it's like saying that I share certain numbers in my phone number as somebody else and saying, oh, well, it's the same phone number, but it's not. So this protein has 532 amino acids, and it only shares 4 amino acids with the COVID-19 spike protein. So it's like confusing an elephant with an alley cat because they're both gray. I just like those pictures. Surprisingly enough, COVID infection can actually cause infertility in men. So that's the actual infection, not the vaccine. And what they've seen is that in some men, after having infection, they actually have decreased sperm production or decreased male hormone production. It could also cause testicular pain and swelling of the testes as well. The American Academy, the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists and the Society for Maternal Fetal Medicine are urging pregnant women to get the vaccine. Pregnant women are severely immunocompromised and are at very, very high risk of having complications from COVID. And I'm sure you guys probably seen this on social media as well. Vaccines make you magnetic, and they are implanting a tracking device. These are also not true. There are no ingredients in these vaccines that that include metals or cause any magnetic fields. I have personally had 2 MRIs, which are probably the biggest magnets you could potentially be in since my vaccine. And if that was true, I would have gotten stuck to the machine. There's definitely no tracking devices in this vaccine. And if somebody wants to track us, we all have cell phones. So that's a much, much easier way to do so. Another myth is I don't need the vaccine if I had COVID. The new research is showing that the natural immune response is messy when it comes to COVID. So both the natural immune response and the vaccine create antibodies. But what they found is that with the natural immune response, it could only bind to one receptor. And with the vaccine immune response, it could bind to multiple receptors. So even if the virus changes, with the vaccination is going to be much more effective. And this was shown in a Kentucky study where they saw that unvaccinated people were 2 times more likely to be reinfected. And I'm going to kind of get a little faster here because my time is running up. But even with healthy people, acute COVID can cause pneumonia, blood clots, strokes, heart attacks, and long-term side effects. A lot of young people are experiencing symptoms way beyond 3 to 5 weeks, including children, including 18 to 34-year-olds, and having what we call long COVID symptoms. And long COVID could cause all of these things over on the left, as well as permanent organ damage. I have several patients myself that were infected last year, and they still haven't been able to get back to work and provide for their families because of this, and they were healthy prior to. Another really important thing is this multi-system inflammatory syndrome in children. And this typically happens about 2 to 3 weeks after either infection or being exposed, where different parts of the body become inflamed. And this could be really serious and possibly fatal. As of July 30th, we've had 4,404 confirmed cases and about 37 deaths from this. The median age is around 9 years old for this. We don't have the most recent data yet because it kind of lags behind. So if you see on the chart there, that end part is the last 6 weeks. So we'll probably be getting that data in pretty soon. All right, so I know I flew through all of this, but the conclusion is we do have the power to prevent transmission of COVID-19. If we work together and apply this multi-layered approach, we could significantly reduce COVID-19 transmission, and we could get some semblance of normalcy back in our lives. Children are definitely affected, and there are some serious cases in children, and unfortunately, those are on the rise. Prevention techniques are safe, they're easy, and they're effective. So we need everybody to do their part. Questions?
Hi, this is Ann. I do have a question. If
Yes.
you can go back to the numbers of people for that 9-year time frame,
Yes.
for people with the flu, right?
Yes.
So you gave us a number for
H1N1,
that.
yeah.
Yeah. And then
Right
the
here.
number of deaths now with COVID.
Yes.
Because I hear that all the time as well, you know, the whole thing with the flu, and people die from the flu all the time, and we do know that, and it's horrible,
Mhm.
but you're giving us data for 9 years. So what were those numbers again?
Yep. So yeah, so I just put it up again. So between 2009 and 2018, it was 75,000 deaths. Again, this is just the U.S. This is a global thing also,
Right.
but just in the U.S. So it's about 75,000 deaths. It was the main number I was focusing on.
Okay, and then the number of deaths for COVID, just in the short span, is
Over 619,000. So as of
1,000.
August
Okay.
12th, we have 619,723.
Wow.
Yeah.
So putting it in perspective, you know, when people talk about that, when they ask you, or, you know, make statements, you know, about people, oh, they die from the flu all the time. Well, this really kind of puts it in perspective time-wise. So thank you for going back to that.
Yeah, no problem. Sorry, I
Sorry,
know I
quick
had to
question.
kind of fly through, so yeah.
The 619, was that globally or is that only for the
This is
US?
just the US. This is just the CDC number. So that's just here in the United States. Globally, it's much, much higher than that. Any other questions?
There's one in the chat from Caddy. For people who have had COVID and are hesitant to get the vaccine, what was the comparison again of antibodies of infection and those of the vaccine?
Gotcha. Okay, so right here. So basically, there's what's called a receptor binding domain on the spike protein. So where the antibodies can actually bind to the spike protein. So what they found is that in a natural infection, the antibodies are only able to bind to one kind of specific domain. Whereas with the vaccine antibodies, they have multiple different domains of where they could bind. So if the virus changes, so like for instance, between the original COVID to Delta, if those domains change where it no longer has the one where the natural antibody could bind, then the natural antibodies won't be able to bind. Whereas with the vaccine antibodies, because they can bind to multiple different ones, it has that flexibility and could kind of change itself up to be able to bind to this new strain or this new variant. Did that answer the question? Okay.
I have one. And so with the vaccine, what I've been hearing is when you take the vaccine, you get some of like the COVID, like it has the COVID-19 in it. So when you get the vaccine, it's like giving yourself a dose of it.
So no, remember the vaccines that are out now are basically just a code. So there is absolutely no COVID in there whatsoever. It's just giving the cell a code so that then the cell could produce that spike protein, which on its own, it can't actually cause an infection. So there's no way to get COVID from the vaccine. Now it will, in some people, it could give you kind of that immune response where you feel like you have a fever, you have body aches and things like that for like 24 hours or so after the vaccine. And that's with any vaccine, that's just the immune response kind of kicking in. But it cannot make you sick whatsoever.
Okay.
You're all done?
Okay.
Okay, how did it go?
Doing well.
Hold on.
Anything actionable at this time? Or?
We're waiting for training and all that. So this meeting I got.
Hey, Corey.
Sure.
Hey, this is Tina. I just wanted to say that, you know, this was one of the best COVID presentations that I've seen. So thank you very much for coming on and doing this.
Oh, well, thank you.
Yeah, I have another question. When do we anticipate FDA approval?
The full approval? So, I mean, at least from what I've been hearing, probably by the end of the year. So there's kind of all these standards that they have to meet to get the emergency approval, and then to do the full approval, it's honestly, it becomes a little more political, but to get the full approval, basically then they have to kind of show data for a certain amount of time, and meet some additional standards to it. But even for the emergency approval, which is what we have now, there's rigorous standards for that. And an example that I could give is the AstraZeneca vaccine, which is available in other countries, is not available here. And the reason being is that the FDA didn't approve it. There was some complications with that one, and they said no. So the ones that we have are the ones that the FDA felt were the safest.
Okay, thank
I
you.
have- And I'm sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah.
We can.
Good morning. Some of our clients here have autoimmune diseases such as lupus, and they're concerned that the vaccine will further exacerbate their condition. Do you have any knowledge about that?
Yeah. So, I forgot what they're called, but the I guess it's like American Academy of Rheumatology or one of those organizations. I forget exactly what the name is. They actually released a statement recently, a few weeks ago, where they have done their own kind of research and checking on that. And there is absolutely no data to show that the vaccine will exacerbate rheumatological diseases. Now, what they do mention is that there are some cases where you might have a mild flare-up. Again, your immune response for anybody, whether you have those type of diseases or not, you're going to flare up a little bit, potentially right after the vaccine. But there is no data to show that there has been any flare-ups that have been severe. Everything has been very mild, and it's been more rare than anything else. And I have plenty of my patients that have autoimmune disease, and I highly recommend it for them because their immune systems are going to be more susceptible to potential complications.
Thank you.
From the infection, not from the vaccine.
And to go along with that that line of questioning, what about women who are breastfeeding and the vaccine, or young adults, young ladies who want to get pregnant? You hear those things too.
Yeah. So that was actually, I kind of skimmed through it, but that was one of the slides. It is highly recommended to get it if you're thinking about getting pregnant or are pregnant, because during pregnancy you are considered to be immunocompromised, and therefore you're a lot higher risk of potential complications. While your breastfeeding is actually completely fine, the cool thing is that moms pass on antibodies to their babies. So if you develop antibodies from the vaccine either before or during pregnancy, those antibodies will actually get transferred to baby and potentially protect baby for a while. Same thing with breastfeeding. So, you transfer antibodies to baby through your breast milk. So that could actually be very beneficial for the baby.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? No. Listen, I just want to thank everybody for being so considerate and so welcoming to my buddy. Thank y'all. Thank you very much for that. Tanya, I appreciate you, so it goes without saying. But thank you for coming in and sharing this valuable information, and I pray that everyone got some information from it. I do want to also just let you know that Tanya's information, I believe, well, I thought I had it up, but I guess I don't. But nonetheless, I want to be able to, I'll pass it along. I'll send it out there. I'll send out her contact information so everyone has it and they can connect with her, and that way she can answer any other questions that you might have.